Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Apologize for that. Dr. Parikh, I think you hit on something earlier that we all kind of glossed over, and that's the RISE Act deters the proliferation of lawyers, and I think we should rename it as such. I want to focus in the realm of national security. We have roughly 40% of I have 40% of I believe of our national R&D project is coming out of the national security realm, the labs, the DARPAs of the world. National security is relative, right? So as we either accelerate or decelerate relative to China and other threats, that's where threats will manifest, and that's where our weaknesses will become vulnerabilities. How are we able to compare how we're doing within classified realms, especially, but through our labs like DARPA, and relative to, say, the Communist Chinese military science research steering divisions? Do you have any insight how we're doing at the national security levels and of military, both military and civil infrastructure investments? And I think Dr. Keene, it sounds like you were touching on this earlier, but let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question, Representative Garcia. I think your question points out the vital importance of the research enterprise in universities to produce the young talent that goes to work in the national security enterprise. I have my own personal experiences in the nuclear weapons program, where there is just tremendous issues, bringing in talent. As you probably know, the big labs right now, Livermore, Los Alamos, and so on, are trying to hire 1,000 people a year to support the refurbishment of our stockpile. So this just speaks to the important mission that our universities and research ecosystem play in training these professionals to handle these national security challenges.
Yeah, but I think what I'm asking is how much insight do we have relative to China? Are they struggling in the same way that we are percentage-wise? I think you mentioned that the rise of investments from the federal government on our side represents about half of what China is accelerating to our pace of over the last couple of years. That statement there, one, where is the data behind that statement? Then how do we assess how much of an impact either COVID or the lack of investments writ large outside of COVID are having relative to the Chinese infrastructure investments?
So I don't have any data on relative Chinese infrastructure investments, Representative Garcia, but the data I quoted is from the NSB Indicators 2020. And if you look at that, you'll find a plot that basically shows R&D expenditures by country, with China rising rapidly and the others, including the U.S., relatively flat or only moderately rising. Just a quick statistic, from, I believe it was 2000 to 2017, China's average annual rate of increase has been 17% in expenditures, and ours is 4.5%. That pretty much summarizes it.
Okay. And then, so how do we ensure that these significant investments that we're making in the COVID packages are actually also gaining traction in the classified programs area, significant military development efforts that may not be enveloped in DoD programs of record quite yet? Some of these are at the university level, some of these are in labs. How do we ensure that these big dollars, these chunks of money being spent on COVID are actually still going through in support of our national security interests?
Well, quickly, I'll say on the university side, our primary connection is training workforce. And so improve our infrastructure allows us to train better people in all fields, and people's careers change when they enter the national security world. So we do the fundamental training. I'll leave it to others to comment on the infrastructure of the national security world.
Mr. Garcia, I can speak a little bit to this. There are two things at play here. One is the funding you're talking about in terms of how do we make sure that the national security research apparatus also sees some of this funding. I think that's very important. You're right. Approximately half, almost half of our research dollars end up in some way going through national security. My thought here is that we need to make sure that part of the scientific enterprise also sees these dollars, because that will also flow to the universities, because they are the workhorses of that enterprise as well. The other impact is on people. And if you look at China, you were noting those dollars. The other thing to note is that they produce lots of scientists and engineers. And so when Dr. Keene talks about we need 1,000 hires a year at our national laboratories, it's easier when you're producing a lot more talent. And we're bringing that talent. We have to import some of that talent in addition to what's on the ground here. So we've got to do it. It speaks again to that human capital aspect, but also making sure that the full half of our enterprise that is defense related needs to also see that fund.
Yeah. Okay.
If I could just add, one of the things that I think supports that infrastructure that we're talking about at the national security level is that if you look at the National Science Foundation indicators, locations like China have also invested substantially in building the talent pool to study the human resource issue, meaning the social and behavioral sciences have really grown in locations like China. One of the areas internationally that is so central is work on the workforce. We've more or less disinvested in research on the workforce, and these support that activity. The investments in each of the defense departments in the social and behavioral sciences is not what it was 10 years ago. And there's often debates about really important activities like the Minerva Research Initiative. That is, it's not under national security research, but the knowledge base from that done in universities really has a tremendous value to a national security interest. And I think that's part of the mosaic that you're asking about.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, thank you all. I yield back.
Mr. Foster is next.